the plenary session of the IFA Congress here in Madrid, and an outsized focus on dispute resolution. That's what IFA President Porus Kaka mentioned yesterday. That's going to be one of the most important issues in the post-BEPS landscape. And we have with us Mr. Achim from OECD, Mr. Michael Danilack, who wore two hats today. One as the former competent authority of the US, and of course now as a consultant with PwC. Let's start with you, Mr. Danilack. 5 or 6 key points that came out from the plenary. First, in terms of the MAP process, a firm commitment to a 24-month time frame that you're seeking, the resource crunch that many countries have for MAP, the process efficiencies that need to improve, MAP access for companies, especially in anti-abuse cases, and the piled up inventories which is bothering everyone. If you could throw a little bit of light on each of these aspects.
If I can remember each all at once.
Yeah, we'll start with the firm commitment to a 24-month time
Yes,
frame.
I think this commitment will work very well for all countries who have significant inventories in MAP. It is a motivating goal, and I'm hoping to see that we have countries respond appropriately to take this obligation seriously. It's important that the cases be resolved quickly, but also that the cases be resolved appropriately. So the governments will have to be very thoughtful in terms of how they're going to proceed to approximate this average completion time, and to ensure that the cases are resolved well, in addition to being resolved quickly.
On the resource crunch and MAP access, that came across as a concern that quite a few companies in some countries are not being denied MAP access in certain situations.
Yeah, well, this is something that the MAP Forum has been very mindful of, and it certainly is a prominent part of the Action 14 plan to ensure that MAP is accessible by companies that face double taxation. It's an important part of our treaty obligations.
Are there particular countries where you've stumbled across these cases?
It's present in virtually every country, as far as I'm aware.
And is the rejection discretionary?
Sorry?
Is the rejection or the denial of MAP access, is it discretionary or subjective?
It's done. It's an interesting issue. It comes up in a number of different ways. There isn't a certain firm denial on any firm basis. You'll just see the question of whether the case should go to MAP be addressed in different ways in different countries.
Mr. Pros, how is the BEPS landscape, Action Plan 14 specifically, going to change the MAP process? How is it going to make it more efficient, more time-bound, and more productive?
Well, as you've seen and as we've discussed, I mean, the Action 14 was part of the BEPS plan, so people tend to overlook that maybe BEPS causes more disputes, but dispute resolution is part of the BEPS plan and part of the solution. So I think that is the first point is important. So what do we have? We have two parts. We have a minimum standard every country has committed to, all OECD, all G20, and all the others that are coming in the inclusive framework, which by now is 85 and counting, to be peer-reviewed based on a minimum standard on their MAP program. They will get peer-reviewed, there will be public reports, there will be input by peers, there will be also input by taxpayers. I think that's significant, shining a light, having a public, if you wish, outcomes-oriented peer review process in other areas such as the Global Forum and Exchange, information, makes a tremendous difference. I think that is huge. Second, and this is the other part, is the arbitration part. We have had arbitration in the OECD Model Convention since 2008. We've worked on this for a long time. It's now included in the multilateral instrument. There is an arbitration provision. So in some sense, there is a twin-track process of improving the MAP, of getting more arbitration. And of course, there's a whole issue around tax certainty and making sure that we reduce the pipeline of what even gets into MAP.
But India is not a part of arbitration. India has not agreed to mandatory
arbitration. India is not part of arbitration. There's other countries as well. This is a difficult question. It also goes to the heart of sovereignty.
What are you doing to convince India to become a part of the mandatory arbitration process? And Michael is smiling.
Michael is smiling. It is a legitimate position of every government to think about what they do in arbitration. It's a discussion that people have to have inside their country. There's different positions in different countries, and it's an evolving thing. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. There's very understandable concerns around sovereignty, for instance. So this is a long-term engagement, a dialogue that's happening. We've had this even in 2008 when it became in the OECD model. So this is not some exceptional, it's India or so. This is just a dialogue and a thinking that needs to happen. and that is happening.
The peer review process that you said will kick off on MAP especially, it will finish by 2020, by which all the OECD and G20 countries will be peer reviewed. Is that, and you'll put out a public report, is it in some way putting a bit of pressure on countries to deliver when it comes to the MAP inventory, which is piled up?
Well, of course, it puts pressure on everybody to improve their performance where maybe the performance isn't up to the minimum standards. That's the whole point of a peer review process. We see this in many areas. We see it on information upon request. We've seen a significant change in access to bank information as a result of minimum standards coupled with a peer review process.
Michael, there were some points mentioned on the process efficiencies, how the right type of cases need to come to MAP. Also the piled up inventories. You had a few countries where the bar literally was going through the roof. So, what can we do? Why is the inventory piled up in some jurisdictions? And is there some correlation with them being high tax jurisdictions, as you possibly indicated?
Well, I think it depends on what type of inventory you're looking at, as we tried to convey in the panel. I think you need to look at the specifics. It's too hard to generalize that this country has a high inventory and therefore it needs to do A, B, or C. It's too difficult without understanding the entire dynamic. What are those cases? How did they come in? Are they the right cases to be looking at in MAP? Is that government operating as efficiently as possible? Have they had the right type of discussions with the counterparts about the fact? I mean, a perfect example to mention the U.S.-India relationship. We did have a period of time where the cases were piling up.
And now we've resolved more than 100.
And now there's more than 100 resolved. Those two governments sat down together and did exactly what I was proposing on our panel that governments should do. They looked at the inventory, they identified the types of cases that were between them. They didn't just say, well, we've got a problem and we should fix it in a global way. They looked very specifically at those cases and found a framework for those cases to allow for the resolution in a very efficient manner, and they're doing extremely well so far, and we hope to see them make it all the way through the inventory they identified.
Michael, another surprising point that came up when one of the panelists said that the overwhelming number of cases are pertaining to individuals and not transfer pricing or permanent establishment. That comes as a bit of a surprise.
Well, it was just a statement by the German representative on the panel that in his inventory he has a very large number of individual cases. Again, it's going to depend on the particular country. He happens to be in Europe, and he has a taxpayer base that's very mobile within Europe, so that those types of individual issues come up as individuals cross borders.
Mr. Pross, you mentioned about the core text of the multilateral instrument which are close to agreement on among most countries, and how it was a difficult process, a lot of constraints, a lot of pulls and pressures from different countries. And you also mentioned something quite interesting, that it might be hard to grasp or to comprehend initially. Is it going to be difficult to comprehend for most tax professionals?
It was certainly not for tax professionals. It's going to be easy reading. You're going to do it sort of on your way and you fly home. You're going to read it before you fall asleep, or maybe you fall asleep because you're reading it. No, I think it's comprehensible for tax professionals. It is a difficult exercise. It is an arbitration provision. There's different arbitration procedures. There's a whole host of reasons why you needed to craft something quite detailed on the appointment of the arbitrators. You need to have strong default rules. So it is a complicated set of rules. You will certainly be able to understand and grasp it. And as I said, there's the possibility of putting in reservations, so that enhances or increases a little bit the complexity, but you will have no problem figuring it out.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Mr. Pross. And next year, probably we'll discuss that easy multilateral instrument at the IFA Congress. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.